The mainstream media lumped everyone together and called everyone goth. Hey cryptic creatures, welcome back to the crypt. In today's video, I'm going to share what it was like growing up goth in the Y2K era. There are some goth playlists in the description below. Please check them out, especially if you're not familiar with the goth genre. Goth coming of age stories, and they're definitely not universal. There's a whole spectrum of experiences that people had growing up. I'd love to hear your stories of how you grew up goth or how you're getting into goth now. And so I'm here to share my story. So I was born in 1989 in El Paso, Texas. Now at the age of 10 is when I started to get into alternative subcultures. The main first one that I got into was nu metal. So I got into bands like Korn, Slipknot, Cold Chamber, Kitty. So at the end of 5th grade year anyway, I got really into nu metal. And as time went on in middle school, I also got into Marilyn Manson and Cradle of Filth. Disclaimer, no, I am not a Manson supporter. If you want to hear my thoughts about Marilyn Manson, watch this video here. And Marilyn Manson is like the bane of every goth person's existence pretty much, because the mainstream media always called him goth. And in the 90s and in the early 2000s, the mainstream media lumped everyone together into one category and called everyone who dressed in dark clothes with dark fashion goth. So that was the fault of the mainstream media for sure. Meanwhile, there was a whole subculture and a whole music genre actually called goth.
In times like these, now I'm feeling zombified.
But the mainstream media did not care. The mainstream media did not care about that. Trust me, growing up, whenever I heard the term goth, it was related to mostly metalheads or nu metal kids and mall goths. So I thought I was goth. People would call me a freak and my friends freaks. They'd scream freak at us all the time. People would also scream goth at us. So they just became labels that I embraced. So I don't remember exactly how or when this happened, but at some point I was informed that the music I was listening to was actually not goth. I had access to the internet at this point, so I Google searched, what is goth music? Editing me here, just popping in to say, I don't think I Google searched because that wasn't mainstream. I think I asked Jeeves or searched on Yahoo. I found then the Sisters of Mercy. Switchblade Symphony. I think I found a list of bands, but those were the first two that I checked out, and lo and behold, I liked them. I didn't totally abandon everything that I liked at that point. I still listened to Korn, Slipknot. Slipknot was my favorite band ever. From the time that I was 10 years old to the time that I was about 21 years old. But even though they were my favorite band, I got really into other genres. And the way that I dressed, my style, was also kind of a mix of everything as well. I wore fishnets, I wore those trip pants, I wore mini skirts, I wore velvet, I wore lace. There were days when I looked more traditional goth. There were days when I looked really nu metal. There were days when I looked just straight up metal, wearing a King Diamond shirt and jeans. My style was all over the place, as was my musical taste. So another big thing that influenced my era growing up was illegal free music downloading.
Maybe I wouldn't have to whore myself out if you kids didn't steal my music.
There was no Spotify back then. YouTube didn't even exist yet. So what we had though was Napster, and then later LimeWire, BearShare, Kazaa. Those were the three that I used. After Sisters of Mercy and Switchblade Symphony, I found a compilation CD, actually by Cleopatra Records, and of all places, I found it at Hot Topic, which was my favorite place to hang out all through middle school, because I would go in there and it would make me feel like, ooh, I'm part of some alternative scene and talk to other alternative people. Surprisingly, Hot Topic did have some real goth merch, and this compilation CD by Cleopatra Records was one of them. And so when I first saw Dancing on Your Grave by DJ Pax, Nonstop Goth. At this point, this was like when I was 14, I already had some knowledge and I was like, oh, probably not real goth. I think at this point I really truly had only listened to Sisters of Mercy and Switchblade Symphony still. So when I turned it over and saw that Switchblade Symphony was on there and a cover of a Sisters of Mercy song, Alice, was on there as well, I was like, oh, this is actual goth. And a lot of bands I had never heard of. So I bought that CD, and that was kind of like a gateway for me because it gave me a sample of bands, and the ones that I really liked were bands that I ended up getting into. So my sophomore year of high school, I switched schools. Hey, future me here. So I just wanted to come in and condense this story down because it did take me 60 minutes to try to tell everything, and that's 60. I was in a goth band when I was in high school. I played music, and the very first band that I was in that actually played shows and recorded a demo was a goth band. We were called Dead Sex. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of photos from that time. A lot of them were on MySpace, which all went away at some point, but I do have one surviving photo here. So for me back then growing up, the scene was a lot of house shows, backyard shows. We did have a goth club called Dido that was 18 and up. I never tried to get in when I was under 18, but I was going to all of these house parties and house shows. In my experience, there was a huge overlap with people who liked metal and goth, but especially people who liked punk and goth. Especially at these house shows, there was a lot of people who were really into punk, who were into punk bands, but who also hosted the goth bands and who were also into goth music. So that was my experience, was just a lot, like I said, a lot of house shows, a lot of house parties, and a lot of overlap in different scenes. So through high school, I was hanging out with my band. It was such a good time. And, I found these people who also enjoyed goth music. We would hang out almost every single day. And if we weren't jamming and writing our own music, we were just fucking around and then listening to music. And the main bands, because we listened to a lot of different bands, but the main bands we listened to, because we had burned the CDs at that time, were Sisters of Mercy, of course, Switchblade Symphony, of course, Bauhaus, Christian Death, Alien Sex Fiend, Specimen, The Virgin Prunes, Cinema Strange, Diva Destruction, Scary Bitches, oh, and Susie and the Banshees, oh, and Tragic Black. I was also in a post-punk band when I was 18. We only played one show together. The music was great, but it just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But I was also in a post-punk band at some point. I feel like the other huge overlap was industrial. We had a lot of cyber goth kids, and when I did become old enough to start going to the club, which was 18 and up, which was Dido, and sadly they shut down in 2013, but they do still have a goth night in El Paso, Texas. When we were able to go to goth nights, there was a lot of industrial, there was a lot of cyber goth. Cyber goth was huge when I was growing up, and I think that that's also a point of contention. People who were around in the 90s, let's say, saw cyber goths largely as invaders. When I was growing up, it just was all one to me, So like, I had friends who were cyber goths, and I never thought, oh, you're not a real goth. Like, it wasn't a big deal. Like, it wasn't like this thing to gatekeep. But again, I myself was listening to new metal, industrial. For me, I just wanted to share this experience because I think, number one, it can be very easy to say goth was this and goth was that, but goth was different for everyone. Yes, the subgenre of goth music is very specific, but I think everyone's experiences in the goth community and goth scene is different, and there's a ton of overlap in a lot of places and spaces. I think that's why for some people it matters so much to define what is goth and what isn't goth, when for others it's like, I personally don't give a shit if someone calls themselves goth and they've never heard of goth music, because I don't think it's their fault. Like, the mainstream media has been calling everyone who dresses in black goth forever, and it continues today. Like, now, like, the Kardashians are starting to wear black and they're calling it goth, and it's the resurgence of goth when it has nothing to do with the music. So for me, I guess that's why I don't take the label too seriously. It's because when I was growing up, it was a big a big overlapping clusterfuck of scenes, and we knew what goth music was, and we would educate people on what it was if they didn't know. Sometimes they liked it, sometimes they didn't. You know, funny thing is, my views about this have changed a little bit. I use the goth hashtag and word in titles for videos because, number one, I do like goth music. Number two, it is a way to find like-minded people. It is a word that's used to describe dark alternative style. Regardless of how you feel about that, that's just the facts. I do try to educate people that it's also a genre when I bring them over to my channel. But, you know, overall it is a word that's used to describe dark alternative people, unfortunately. Over the last few years, because I started using TikTok a lot more last year, and I will say I do understand the frustration when you search goth, or you know, when goth is your subculture, your main subculture, your main music genre that you like, and everything you stumble across has nothing to do with goth. You know, I started to get a little bit annoyed by that as well when I was using TikTok mostly. And particularly what would annoy me is like when people were like, I'm going goth, I'm trying goth, I'm doing this goth style, and it's like, that actually has nothing to do with goth. So I get it. You know what, I feel like I've been a little hard on people who are upset about that and very vocal about how upset they are. For me, like I said before, I think it's because it's an uphill battle at this point, and it's better to just focus on highlighting things in the scene, highlighting the music, instead of constantly fighting against this never-ending stream of content that has nothing to do with the goth subgenre, music genre. But I do understand the frustration. And this is me 2 years later, after when I originally recorded the majority of this video. I get it. Like, I'm much more empathetic to people who are upset about it now, because if I was looking for stuff related to metal and like everything was related to country, I think I would be pissed off, you know what I mean? Or like, you know, if I was looking for stuff that was about metal and it was just all about fashion but nothing about the music, I do think, I mean, that would be upsetting. So I am more empathetic to that side of it than I used to be. I still get annoyed by it when people are like too vocal about how upsetting it is, because like we know, like, can we move on? But I get it. I am more empathetic to that than I used to be. So I think that these experiences that I had shaped why I respond the way that I do. But that's my story. That's my story. That's how I ended up who I am and where I am now. I went to my first goth night in 10 years, just like last month, and it was such a blast. So that is my story of growing up goth / metal / alternative in the 2000s, and how it's affected me today, and how I'm basically having a resurgence of my baby bat days in my 30s. You can do it, doesn't matter how old you are. If you're young, I've just given you a list of goth bands. You can check out some playlists in the description below. If you're old, you can be who you are. Let go of the stigmas, let go of the judgment, because at the end of the day, what matters is that you have a good time and that you enjoy life and you enjoy being yourself and doing what you want. And you will find that it is worth it. All right, so that's it. Take care of yourselves because it is the most important thing, and I will see you in the next video.